And let's see, you ought to get that message. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. I don't know, I'm in Aberdeen and it's a miserable day here today. It was beautiful yesterday, but it's absolutely miserable today. But thank you very much for joining us. Before I pass over to our speakers for today, I just want to welcome you. My name is Judith MacDonald. I'm the branch chair for the North of Scotland and Islands. We've got two speakers today. We've got Kirk Tudhope from Ledingham Chalmers and Carol James from Johnson Carmichael. But before I hand over to Kirk, who will introduce Carol, I just want to give you a quick reminder about some upcoming events that we've got on the branch. On the 8th of October, we've got a mental health panel event with Carolyn Taylor and Morag Ormiston, who are going to explain why HR need to check their own resilience and well-being before they help others. On the 28th of October, we have an event about a relocating partner, which is about dealing with expat staff. And then on the 4th of November, we have Campbell Urquhart from the White Cube Partnership, who's going to talk about what next. And that's really aimed at people who've either been made redundant due to the downturn in oil and gas or due to the downturn with COVID. Unfortunately, there seem to be more and more people, and I guess it will probably happen with the end of furlough in the next month, that more and more people will be made redundant. So it's aimed at mid-career people. And then on the 10th of November, we have the Hidden Carer. As ever, all details are on the branch webpage, as are the links to Eventbrite where you can book up. But without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Kirk for the rest of the session. What I will say is, if you want to ask any questions, please use the chat box function for that, and I'll keep a monitor of that, and we can put these questions to both Carol and Kirk. But Kirk, over to you.
Hi, thanks for that, Judith. Nice seeing everybody, nice seeing so many familiar faces. If it makes you feel any better, Judith, it's a pretty miserable day here in the Highlands as well. We have two topics today, but there's a broad connection here, and the broad connection is financial challenges which are lying ahead of us from a business perspective, also from a personal perspective. I'll introduce Carol, and I'll say a few words at the end, maybe just touching on how it impacts in business. I'll touch on then further, I'll touch on redundancy, and I'll touch on the shiny new job support scheme, which was unveiled by the Chancellor last week. But I do feel I'm the sort of doughy white bread in the lunchtime sandwich, and the real substance is Carol James from Johnson and Carmichael. And Carol James's talk is really well timed, because it deals with the financial challenges which we as individuals may be facing. And I think everybody in the workplace probably knows somebody or fears for somebody who may be facing these sort of challenges. And I also know what might happen in the workplace, which is that because we're all really nice people and we're all trying to be supportive, we might want to personally get involved and personally give advice and personally be supportive. And I can see where that comes from, but from a slightly negative perspective, from an employment lawyer's perspective, I can also see where that sort of stuff goes wrong. Sometimes we need to have a little bit of a divide between employer and employee. We need to have a little bit of a divide between professional life and personal life, not least because sometimes we have to take very difficult decisions as an employer in relation to employees, and knowing lots of the personal details about them doesn't help that. But also, we might be giving financial advice. Are we really experts to give financial advice? I certainly am not. And sometimes it gets worse. And this happens more often than you might think. I've seen where employers jump in and actually give financial support. So they pay money to staff who need money. And then there's a big confusion, particularly if there's a fallout. Well, was it a gift? Was it a loan? Was it a taxable? Was it a personal payment from an individual, or was it from the business? So the road to hell, as ever, is lined with good intentions. So sometimes getting really heavily involved with your colleagues doesn't help. But fortunately, there's alternatives. There are real experts out there. Now, how great would it be if we could say to people, well, we know you've got challenges, we are being sympathetic, we are being supportive, but you really want to speak to somebody. And the person we have today is Carol James from Johnson Carmichael, who is an expert, a bona fide expert in these matters. And Carol will be talking to us about financial well-being and one or two of the things which are out there. So I will hand over shortly to Carol James, who's an insolvency practitioner, But I know two things about Carol, one of which I found out today, and I hope it's true. This came from our mutual friend Mervyn Stanley, so you might be having me on about this. You have to tell me if this is right. And the one thing I do know for certain about Carol, like all good people, despite being a rather tough insolvency practitioner, she's got a heart of gold, and I know this because she likes dogs. And when Carol and I get together, we just talk about dogs, and Carol's got a new puppy, so she's got a full-time job there. But the other thing I heard today was Carol's got another hobby. Carol is a surf champion. Is that right?
It is actually true, although it was some time ago.
Oh, how cool is that? Everybody's really jealous. I fell off my chair with surprise. So the great thing about that is that Carol's got a very interesting life, but it also allows me to do say that Carol is going to take us through the choppy financial waters which lie ahead. So on that basis, I will hand over to Carol, and I will see you later to discuss redundancies, etc. Okay, Carol.
Well, thank you, Kirk, for dredging up my past. But yes, a bona fide Scottish surfing champion from 19 Oatcake and possibly before. So I'm going to share my screen for this presentation. And as Judith said, any questions, if you can use the chat facility, then Kirk and I can come back to them at the end of both our presentations. So I'll do my best to now share this. We did test this beforehand, so hopefully it'll work. Okay, so as Kirk's already mentioned, what I want to talk about today is employee financial well-being. This is actually a topic that's very close to my heart because in my work as an insolvency practitioner, I come across some absolute horror stories about people getting into difficulty despite having good jobs quite often. So it's really looking at that and giving you all some indication of what's actually going on perhaps under the surface that we're not always aware of. As Kirk said, I am a restructuring manager and insolvency practitioner at Johnson Carmichael, based full-time here in Inverness, so happy to handle any queries that you may have at any time. So first of all, looking at what exactly is financial well-being. So when we talk about well-being, we all know about physical well-being. It's well documented that healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, exercise, going for screening programs, going to your GP, all help to give you physical well-being. It's the feel-good factor when your body's working as it should be. Tied to that, we also have mental well-being. Now, 5 years ago, probably mental well-being wasn't such a hot topic, whereas these days, mental well-being is much more to the fore. The stigma of admitting to having a mental problem, whether it's anxiety or claustrophobia, depression, bulimia, all these things, there's much less stigma attached to that these days. I mean, we've seen Jessie Nelson from Little Mix and her program, which I think came out last year, very well received, touched on a lot of issues of social media, and especially when you're talking about young women and how they see themselves. And just recently we've had Freddie Flintoff talking about his 20-year battle with bulimia. So now mental health and mental well-being is very much a mainstream topic as well. But it's the financial well-being which I think is still quite stigmatised in the UK. We don't talk about money worries as much as perhaps we should do. But all these elements of well-being combine to make people actually happy and content in their lives. So I just feel that financial well-being is crucial to your overall health and happiness. So financial well-being, we're talking about there having sufficient funds or finances to be able to live your life to the full, to not be stressed about or worried about bills coming in or job security or pay rises and so on and so forth, being able to support your family financially as well as in other ways. So a little bit of a backdrop, this is a bit of a page of statistics, but it gives a broad view of what it's like in the UK just now. So consumer debt levels are estimated at in excess of 200 billion. I mean, that's such a big number. I don't know how big that is. It's just massive. We're talking here about credit cards, unsecured loans, we're talking about mortgages, we're talking about everything. And then the next fact there, the average UK citizen is £31,000 in debt, not including student loans. Look at the date of that statistics. It was pre-COVID, January 2020, when COVID was just something that was possibly happening in China. So it's going to get worse. There's a lot of evidence that individuals are using savings to pay off their debt. Savings rates at the moment in the UK are so low, and not many people have savings, but there isn't a tendency, if things go a bit wobbly or things get tough, people will dip into their savings to pay off that unexpected bill or to pay off a credit card that's getting a little bit too much, whether that's a parent paying off their child's credit card or whether it's someone doing it themselves. Always with a good intention to then save that money back up, but circumstance often overtakes us and we don't do that. The money advice research indicates that 18.2 million people are over indebted. So that's potentially 18.2 million people facing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis the stress of not being able to pay their bills. We've got another 6 million jams, as they're called, which is just about managing. So that's probably a lot of people that you are dealing with, and people in employment who have enough to just about pay their bills. With COVID at the moment, there's maybe not the job security that they have, and I'm sure we all know people who have lost their jobs or maybe facing redundancy, and they think, well, I can get by for maybe a month or a couple of months, but then what? We've also got on credit cards, a lot of people use credit cards for pretty much anything and everything these days and just pay the minimum balance. So they just set up a direct debit, so they're paying maybe £5 a month on an £1,800 debt or £25 on £2,000 of debt, high interest rates. And basically, they're not actually reducing. If you actually work out how long it takes to pay off a credit card debt in that manner, it can run into years, even though it's probably taken someone maybe 2 months to build up that level of debt. So the Financial Conduct Authority now requires that any customers who are only paying the minimum for 18 months must be referred for money advice. So that's actually a good move in many respects. I've already mentioned COVID-19 and how that's going to be affecting so many people in this country. I mean, it would be, it's just going to make so many more people go into indebtedness, whether it's for the short term or whether it's for the long term, depending on their circumstances. But basically what we're looking at is, as it says here, building up an avalanche of people looking for debt advice. We're basically, as more and more people are looking for advice, it's where can they go? And as I've pointed out here, a lot of these people could be your own employees. And as Kirk touched on, it's about who do they turn to. So your employees who are working full time need to get help, possibly to get advice on how to deal with their debt situation. And looking at now, how do people actually get into debt? Because sometimes people can be harsh and say, oh, it's just your own stupidity. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. I always tell clients who come to see me, and quite a lot of them are ashamed of the situation that they're in. And I always try and reassure people by basically saying, look, hindsight is great, isn't it? Of course you wouldn't have done X, Y, Z if you'd known then what you know now. But there's so many different reasons why people end up in debt. So health issues, you may have had some sort of diagnosis which meant that your job changed. I had one case where I had an offshore worker, so he was earning the big bucks. He had a health condition and he had to work onshore. He still kept his job within the company, but his salary effectively halved. But he was used to spending the big bucks and he was never going to get back offshore again. But that suddenly changes everything. Dependency issues, we're talking here about sort of alcohol, drug dependency, and obviously that can have a huge impact on your finances, or the finances if you've got a child who's going through drug or alcohol dependency, or another family member. and you're trying to basically support that person through that issue. Family breakdown, very common, and I'm sure everybody with us today knows somebody who's gone through this, where divorce or separation, and suddenly the finances are basically halved. Caring responsibilities as well. I mean, if you're caring for a dependent, whether that's a child or an elderly parent, you may have been able to work full time and suddenly you're now working part time, or maybe you're having to fund someone's care, and obviously that puts a financial strain on as well. Redundancy is obviously a big one that we're facing currently with the coronavirus. That's on everybody's thoughts at the moment. In fact, my own son was made redundant on Tuesday. Luckily, he got a job this morning. Very lucky guy. Consumer spending is a big one. Credit cards we've touched on already. Payday loans are thankfully not so prominent now, but what we do have on a lot of online shopping is buy now, pay later, which is rearing its ugly head because quite often it's interest-free credit that's been given and it looks fantastic, but if you miss a payment, oh boy, do you get hit with big consequences. And also a lot of these buy now, pay later schemes are not regulated in the same way that credit cards are. In my profession, we think that this buy now, pay later schemes are the next payday loans, and we're expecting, big issues from that as well. Surprise bills. The car breaks down, the fridge breaks down, the roof leaks. Doesn't take a genius to see that that can actually have quite a big impact as well. COVID-19 is just one of the biggest, well, it is the biggest impact on so many people in all our lifetimes. And I think this is going to cause a lot of long-term debt. We already see it from the country in terms of the UK government basically creating debt that we're going to be paying off, or our children are going to be paying off for years to come. It's exactly the same for individuals. People are having to shore up things by basically getting access to debt to survive. And finally, on this one, we have gambling, which is, again, one of these ones which I think is going to come to the fore. We're still seeing a lot of gambling websites advertising, and it's quite ridiculous that it's not been addressed. We've seen some legislation for gambling to be restricted in some ways, but really this is one where, I mean, I had one client in the space of 3 months. He still is, thankfully. We managed him to retain his job, but he was part of the management team in a local business. So he was senior management, and he just wanted to he wanted to do right by his family, is how he told me about it. He wanted to build an extension, and he just thought, oh, if I just do this, if I just win this bet, I could get that extension and we can have another baby, and so on and so on. In the space of 3 months, he went from having a perfect life of, wife, 2 kids, hoping to have another kid, a good job, house, all the rest of it, to being about £40,000 in debt. 3 months, that's all it took. He was suicidal, and he was talking about quitting his job because he just couldn't see a way out. So we managed to actually get him sorted out. Unfortunately, he did still separate from his wife, but at least as far as I'm concerned, he's still alive and he's still in a good job, and there is a future for him. So this is just looking at some analysis from the Money Advice Service from 2019. So again, I think we can probably increase these figures after 2020. So about 10.2 million adults are termed as struggling. So they're living on a financial tightrope, often living day to day. They might not do a weekly shop for their groceries because they think, no, if I just get I might go to the supermarket and get the stuff that's on offer and just do it day by day. They are going to be in arrears on their credit card or on their rent or their mortgage, and they might be just paying a little bit here and there just to keep the wolf from the door. And they're very much, it's their reactive approach to money. In addition, so we've got 13.1 million adults who are termed as squeezed. So this is, it's a lot of people. So they basically are living, often working, these people, so they're often employees. They are trying to keep up with the Joneses a little bit, or keeping up with the expectations of their families. So they're maybe going on holidays, well, not obviously this year, but maybe they are. Maybe they're holidaying at home, having a staycation, but they always have to change their car every 3 years. And these are the buy now, pay later group, I would say. No savings whatsoever, but because they're working, they think, oh, it'll be all right, I can get by. And then we've got a huge chunk of 28, almost 29 million termed as cushioned. So these people have good financial foundations, so they're probably in good jobs. They probably have, they've got a property that they own that's mortgaged. They've got maybe 1 or 2 cars. They've got good clothes. Basically, on the outside, it looks like they've got a good, solid life. But they also spend quite a lot. So they'll go to nice restaurants. They'll maybe go to Disneyland. Again, not this year. But, they will spend up to their income levels. And it just takes it's like a Jenga tower, a couple of blocks removed, and the whole lot comes crashing down. Again, I've seen evidence of this. I always call it fur coat and knee knickers, is my sort of description of people that are caught like this, because when things do come crashing down, they can't quite believe the situation that they're in. So looking at financial well-being now, and how this, what effect this has on an individual, but also on you in your role as HR people within organisations. So for an individual, that there's obvious things going on. There's strain on the family. You're borrowing more money to get by. You're maybe taking time off work because you're just stressed out to the max, or maybe you haven't slept for a couple of days and you just can't face going to work. You might have a wage arrestment, which can be critical, because wage arrestments are limited in terms of how much an arrestment can be on your wages, but they don't take account of the rest of your expenditure. So they don't take into account the fact you've got to pay the mortgage, you've got to pay the electricity and so on. You might be trying to downsize or selling assets, and you might have to do that quickly, so you're actually losing money. Your mood change. You might not be able to retire. All these things are clearly have a huge impact on the individual. For the employer, when you're dealing with employees who are facing difficulties financially, there's things, absenteeism affects the company as well, because obviously you have to get cover, or perhaps you're pushing back deadlines. If say your project manager is absent, off with stress due to financial problems, who's going to pick up the pieces? You're maybe then having to push customers back, saying, look, I'm sorry, we can't meet that deadline because, we haven't got the resource at the moment, but it should be okay. Decrease in productivity obviously has an impact on the employer as well. Having, people with mood changes as well, and the effect that it has on, if you're working within a small team, if one person is stressing out and not maybe pulling the weight, not focused on the job in hand, that's going to affect the whole team. So just because an individual has financial difficulties, that doesn't mean to say it's also not going to affect the employer as well. This is the, unfortunately, really depressing slide. It's talking about the actual link between financial debt and mental health. Now, these stats are for England, and actually the statistics on suicide suggest that Scotland has a higher suicide rate than England. And I know from other studies that the Highlands has the highest suicide rate in Scotland. So looking at these statistics for England, I think these are probably less or not as high as the same could be said for Scotland. So looking at that slide, 420,000 people in problem debt consider taking their own life. Problem debt is where they have more than one debt, they have multiple debts, and they're in arrears. And of that 420,000, 100,000 actually attempt suicide. And that's a shocking figure. And people with problem debt are 3 times more likely to have considered suicide than people who are not in problem debt. So while we're not saying that financial well-being or financial stress is the cause of a lot of suicide. It is clear that it's a factor in many, many suicides, and there is an absolute clear link between debt and poor mental health. We've got another sort of side to the story here is actual debt advice. So, you know, clearly we've got a massive problem with people facing financial stress, but where can they go for advice? Now this, Peter Wyman did a study, it was the first independent review of the advice services in the UK. It's a little bit old, it was done in January 2018, but I don't think things have improved. So it basically, Peter Wyman said that there's just clearly not enough advice services in the UK. He said that we can't rely on citizens' advice bureaus and charities and local advice centres to provide the advice that is required. I mean, anecdotally, we hear of long waiting lists at citizens' advice. Certainly last year in Inverness, it was at least 6 to 8 weeks before you could get an interview, even an initial interview, if you had financial worries. That's too long for a lot of people. If they've got the sheriff officers chapping at the door, or if they have an earnings arrestment, that's too long to wait, because it'll just, you know, they need action now. For people who are actually in work, as it says on the slide, taking time off to go and queue for advice at citizen advice, or taking time off to get an appointment is, you know, that can impact then on them, because they might not want to admit to having this difficulty to their employer, and equally their employer might be, well, no, that's something you have to do in your own time, because we've got deadlines to meet, we've got customers to supply, and so on and so forth. But basically, what Peter Wyman report suggested that the advice that had to be given, or the advice services needed to be increased by at least 50% to even meet the demand at that time. So as I said, that report was in January 2018. We've since had COVID, so if it's only 50%, that would be great, but I suspect it'll be actually a lot higher. So what we have is this advice gap. We also have, on the other side, is the funding for money advice services. And unfortunately, this was a Scottish review that was done by Improvement Service in Scotland. And they actually concluded that there'd been a reduction in spending of 45% on money advice in the last 3 years. So we require an extra 50% of actual advice centres. Meanwhile, they've been cut by 45%. So we have what's, as I said, this advice gap of people who are crying out for help. And a lot of people do actually want to get help, but there's no one there to give them the help that they need. So quite clearly, more advice is needed, but less is available. And this is where HR, employers have actually an ability to help their employees to basically get to a service or get to the right services and get the money advice that they need. So the role of the HR person is actually vital in ensuring that employees can actually get the help that they need when they need it, rather than just trundling on and things getting worse. So looking now at the impact of employee debt, there's some interesting stats here. I'll let you read through them yourselves, but we've also got other ones. There's 1 in 4 employees have actually lost sleep thinking about financial worries. And if you imagine that someone's coming to work overtired and exhausted, and perhaps working on a production line or maybe operating heavy machinery, and they're not fully focused because they're shattered, the health and safety risks are clear. We've also got an estimate that it's costing the UK economy something like £120 billion a year, just with people stressing out about money and taking time off, or being at work and not being fully functioning at work because they're stressing about their financial position. They've estimated about 18 million working days are lost through this every year as well. So basically, poor financial well-being affects the bottom line of every employer business out there. I just put a note on the bottom of the slide. One thing that I find when I give money advice is people come to me and initially they can be, as I said earlier, ashamed, they can be angry, they can be distressed. It's usually a very emotional meeting. But once we've sat down with individuals and gone, looked at the picture, looked at their situation and started to consider some options, relief is probably the biggest emotional reaction they have to actually being able to talk about what's going on and actually being able to consider some of the solutions. There's a lot of things that people can do to try and manage debt. Self-help is always good. And it's a case of basically facing up to what the issue is. It's no different from any other mental health issue that you have. You have to be able to face up. For example, if you're an alcoholic, you have to face up to that. If you have a gambling addiction, you have to face up to that. So it's the same with debt. It's understanding the debt you have. So basically, it's looking at it, recognizing it, and quantifying it. I've actually sat in an interview with a couple, and when I asked them to prepare for our meeting, and they'd sat down the previous night and basically understood their debt. And when they came in to see me, they were both just shocked that they had so much debt. And when we started our meeting and we looked at how that debt had occurred, they were just, they went through, it was like a roller coaster of emotion for them. But it was incredible how much debt they'd incurred without even noticing it. So the first step is always understanding exactly what the position is. And then, as I said, you've got these self-help tools that can help a lot of people to just stop getting into a worse position and also start to turn things around and get back on track. So there's fairly standard stuff, creating a budget, making overpayments, keeping up with minimum, balance transfer, looking for payment breaks, freezing interest, trying perhaps getting another job or seeking a pay increase, looking at your expenditure. Do you really need Sky, Netflix and Amazon Prime? Can you just have one? Key one there is don't take any further debt. So many people do that, and I see it all the time in my job, is that even when people are struggling, they will still think, oh, but I needed to replace the sofa, so I got a buy now, pay later one on that. And the most important message that I always say to people is don't bury your head in the sand. There is help out there, but the key is to basically recognise that you are in that situation and make that mental decision to turn things around. So if self-help is not an option, perhaps it's because things are too far down the line and you're starting to get earnings arrestments, or you might be getting nasty letters threatening repossession, threatening eviction. What we can do is just take things a little bit further. So first of all, what we do, we have this employee financial wellbeing service, and what we start off with is a free consultation. So it's about, going back to the previous screen, recognising the debt. So we basically sit down with people and we look at exactly what their position is, how much debt they have, what their income is, what their outgoings are. We then look at what suits them. So we're very much about the individual person, and even when we have husband and wife, we may treat them differently depending on their circumstances, because a lot will depend on the type of job they have, what savings they have, whether the debt is joint debt or individual debt. But we basically work through various options that are open to them. And depending on what their situation is, we will then recommend any one of these solutions that are listed there, whether it's a debt write-off, token payments, moratorium, sequestration. And this is, as I've said here, the obligatory slide on COVID-19. So throughout the talk so far, I've basically shown that already we've got a massive debt problem for individuals within this country. And now we've got, on my most hated quote, unprecedented times. So we've got unprecedented times with all the job insecurity. We don't know what's coming in the future, on top of what I would call shaky foundations of this massive consumer debt problem that we've already got. In Scotland, the coronavirus bills that have been introduced by the government do offer some protection to individuals at the moment. So if you are behind on your mortgage or behind on your rent, there's not much legal action ongoing at the moment in terms of evictions and repossessions. It's not a blanket stop. It does very much depend on the circumstances of each individual case, but the vast majority of tenants and homeowners who are in arrears, they are for the moment not being evicted. When someone is pursuing you for a debt, prior to the coronavirus bill, if you owed someone £3,000 or more, they could petition for your sequestration. That's now increased to £10,000 or more. So it just means that there's less credit, that, you know, it's a tool that a creditor is less likely to have in their toolbox to basically get the money that's owed by the debtor. Council tax is probably one of the biggest debts that I see in my profession, and a lot of the local councils would pursue quite aggressively for the repayment of council tax and would put in petitions for sequestration. Since COVID, that's just stopped because it's a bit of a political hot potato, and it's probably not seen to be doing the right thing for a council to pursue someone for council tax when they've just lost their job or are struggling for any other reason, you know, less work hours, or maybe they're shielding, whatever the reason. It's not the right thing to do. Another protection that individuals have is an increase in minimal asset process, that's MAP, levels for if you want to self-sequestrate. So if someone says, right, no, I need to throw the towel in, they can basically get an insolvency practitioner to sign a certificate and they can apply for their own sequestration. It used to be you had to have debts of no more than 17,000, excluding student loans. That level's now increased to 25,000. And the fee for doing so has also reduced. It was now I think it was £90 or £100, I'm not quite sure, but it's now been brought down to £50. So it just allows individuals to take control and sequestrate themselves, which is sometimes the best route to take, and do it much more easily. There's also a moratorium available to people who owe money, and this just puts the brakes on. So if creditors are pursuing someone saying, right, we're going to petition for your sequestration, if they owe more than 10,000, or if there's real creditor pressure, the debtor can apply for a moratorium. It used to be that it was 6 weeks, and you could only do it once every 12 months. Now the moratorium lasts for 6 months. And literally as soon as that one runs out, you can apply for another. So at the moment, the legislation is there to protect the debtor from aggressive action by a creditor. So a lot of us feel that we're actually just kicking the can down the road, as it were. These changes in the legislation don't take away the debt. They don't solve the problem of people's habits in creating debt. But this kind of the moratorium and making it harder for creditors to pursue a sequestration does give the opportunity to individuals to actually seek help now, to maybe make the changes that are required for post-COVID and coming out the other end. So, as I say, the solutions, what we do at Johnston Carmichael, we have this employee financial wellbeing service. And what we do is, it's all about the advice, and it's the advice for the individual, and we're not trying to sell one scheme to all. It's very much about dealing with an individual, looking at their situation and finding a solution for them. We offer a service to employers as well, so that they can roll out this advice to their employees, whether it's on the intranet, by email. probably not at the moment, but we do have posters that can go up in office kitchens or in canteens, whatever. We use other partners so that we can build on your intranet and give a platform for all types of benefits that you might be offering to your employees. The main thing is that people get time to understand what choices they have, and they can consider what might suit them. We meet with employees, we meet with with their spouses if required. If an arrestment has been applied to their wages, we can deal with that very quickly. It's not a case of waiting 6 weeks. We aim to answer any email inquiries within 24 hours and phone inquiries within that business day. So if someone phones our helpline out of hours, it will be dealt with the following business day. Emails, as I said, within 24 hours. So we offer a free interview, and as it says on the screen there, we basically do a fact find. Sometimes it might just be a case of saying, well, actually, you're not in too much trouble, so if you make a few lifestyle changes, you will be able to turn this situation around. And we can point them to different websites with different budgeting tools or different advice for them to look at and turn things around by themselves. We might suggest them to contact creditors, and we might give them advice of the wording of a letter to contact creditors to see if they can reach an informal solution. But basically, we make sure that whoever comes to us, we get the full information and provide them with tailored, hopefully tailored solutions. And the absolute ultimate goal is to have financial rehabilitation. So we're looking at not only getting people out of debt through whichever solution is available to them, but also looking to change the way that people deal with money so that their financial well-being is at the core of what we do. So as well as, this is on our employee financial well-being, so we've got employees obviously get the benefit, but for employers, if you were to sign up for the whole service, which I have to stress is also free, what you can expect is basically these are the 4 key ones that we've picked out. Better productivity, absenteeism goes down, presenteeism as well goes down. Presenteeism is when someone is at work but maybe not focused on the work because they're stressing about something else. Better relationships, and that's within the team, within management, and employee loyalty. There's a few extra stats in there just showing how key it is for employers and employees in terms of financial well-being. Now, as well, just to point out, if the employee financial well-being service that we offer is with COVID and a lot of people working from home, there is a danger that maybe we aren't seeing people as much, so we're maybe not picking up on the signals of someone under financial stress. So the way we work, we have a fully digitized service, so we can obviously have a video conference call with an individual. We can work with employers and give you digital information so that you can just do a global email out to all your employees. What we do is every quarter we might send out an email to you as an employer with a hot topic, whether that's the buy now pay later or whether it's credit card freezes, interest freezes, anything that's a hot topic, changes to the coronavirus bills, anything that affects individuals and their debts, we send out to employers, and then you as employers can just forward that on to your employees. So hopefully, even despite not being able to physically see people, you can still be able to offer them the assistance that they need. So how to get in touch with us, that's the free phone number up there, and our email address as well for just general money advice, so please feel free to share that with your employees. Our website there as well gives further information on the money advice, and obviously my work email is shown on screen as well. So as I said at the start, please do feel free to fire questions into Judith, and after the end of Kirk's presentation, we're quite happy to hopefully answer any questions that you may have. But in the meantime, I'm going to thank you for your time and pass you over to Kirk.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. I'm actually just drawing breath because it's just so much to take in. I mean, the stats are incredible. Seriously, stats are really sobering. The impact in the business, but the stats you have about the amount of people who are potentially affected. My mental arithmetic's not great, but it looked like it was 50 million plus.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think 1 in 4 employees is suffering now from financial stress pre-COVID. Yeah. So most of us work in places with more than 4 employees. Yeah.
Yes, and as you say, there's a cold wind coming by Christmas, I fear. Well, thank you for that talk. Carol has very kindly said she will work the slides for me. What the context, and this is just going to be a very quick sweep up. The context of I was going to chat about is really where we are with some of the government initiatives and the risk of redundancies, which are behind changes to the scheme. So I was going to touch on furlough. If you would click to the next slide, thank you, Carol. I was going to touch on furlough and the shiny new job support scheme. I was going to talk about redundancy, but I'm thinking just in terms of times, but also just in terms of the energy we have after having to take in Carol's excellent talk. I might skip on the redundancy point because it really would have been a roller coaster ride. And Judith and Melody, if there's an appetite for a proper session on redundancy, because it is a big topic just now, we would very happily, the Leadingham Chalmers employment team would very happily come back and just do a topic on that, and if people have questions on redundancy, they know where to find me. So if it's okay with you, Judith and Melody, I'll just look at furlough very briefly. I'll touch on the job support scheme, and I will come back and talk to you about redundancies, particularly individual redundancies, if there's an appetite for that. Is that okay, Judith?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thanks, Kirk. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so furlough, many of you have heard me say this, furlough is such a radical thing, but because it's been with us for so long, we tend to forget how radical it is. If somebody in February had come up to you and said that a Conservative government with a Conservative Chancellor would, for the next 6 or 7 months, would be paying a substantial part of employees' wages and intervening in the private marketplace to the extent which furlough was, you would think we're mad. You think that's never going to happen in this country, but of course it has happened. And it's been hopefully a helpful thing, although the worry is, as alluded to by Carol, the worry is that furlough has saved some jobs, but quite how many jobs it has saved, we will only find out when furlough comes to an end. Do you want to click on the next slide? Thank you, Carol. Because furlough is coming to an end. Furlough's coming to an end, and I don't think this was deliberate, but it's coming to an end at Halloween. So obviously people like me are going about saying, is there a horror show coming come Halloween when furlough ends? If you can see the slide, you'd see some pumpkins. If you go back one, I have to have a confession to make, Carol. There's one really beautifully carved pumpkin on what would be your right hand side, and 2 rather amateurish pumpkins. I will not admit to who carved the rather amateurish pumpkins that was taken in my house at Halloween. But anyway, Halloween is when furlough comes to an end. So what should we be thinking about in advance of furlough's end? And I'm sure you're ahead of me in relation to this, but I've got a few bullet points for you nonetheless. Thank you, Carol. Remember, the furlough is a change to people's terms and conditions. We couldn't impose furlough, we had to get agreement. So when people are furloughed, they're still employees, but they're on differing terms and conditions. When furlough comes to an end, no doubt you wish to end the furlough terms and conditions. You're not going to get a government contribution anymore. Now, hopefully, you will have checked your furlough agreements, and hopefully your furlough agreements will be pretty clear about how you bring furlough to an end. But remember, it doesn't happen automatically. You might have to give notice of the ending of furlough. So check your furlough agreements and give some thought to how it is you're going to bring furlough to an end. Sadly, we have to think of the needs of the business. Just now in HR, people will be very heavily involved in this. All these people in furlough, people have been in furlough now. Some people have been in furlough, challenging though this is for them, since the middle of March or certainly late March. they will be questioning whether their business needs them since they've been off so long. You'll have to consider the same thing. And of course, that brings us back to the challenges of redundancy. If we are going to make difficult decisions in relation to staff, the furlough scheme can give us some degree of financial support up until the 31st October. If people are being given notice that their employment is going to come to an end, what tends to happen these days, rather than pay in lieu of notice, people are being asked to serve the notice, but they could serve the notice in furlough, which means at least you get some money back. And there's also some business decisions being made that we're also requiring people to take their holidays while they're on furlough. Why is that? Well, one, if they are coming back, we don't want people to come back and take the rest of the year on holidays because it's important work for them to be done. Or if we are going to have to make a difficult decision in relation to staff, accrued holiday pay can be quite expensive. You can require staff to take holidays while they're serving their notice, while they're on furlough, but because the clock is ticking, these are not decisions you'd be wanting to delay taking, and certainly you would not wish to be taking them then late, about a week or so before the 31st of October, because it's too late by then. So we should be thinking about people's terms and conditions, needs of the business. Can we use furlough during notice periods? Can we use furloughs to reduce the holiday entitlement which staff may have? I know it sounds a bit mean, but some businesses have to take very difficult decisions to protect themselves, and not all businesses are going to be with us come Hogmanay, I don't think. Okay, Carol. Now, if you, and I'm sorry if this makes anybody seasick, if you could fast forward through the slides, Carol, and eventually you'll get to a very charming picture of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. If I could ask you to pause then. We're almost there. There he is. There's Rishi. Of course, I've changed job retention scheme, which is the furlough scheme, to the job support scheme, because this was the brand new scheme that Rishi announced last week. And because the furlough scheme was so radical, some people, I'm sad enough to admit me, got rather excited by this. And I confess I went away from my virtual office in my house, and I went down to watch Rishi's announcement, I think it was last Thursday, of the new job support scheme. What I heard Rishi say seemed very radical. What he seemed to say was it was almost like an extension of the current flexible furlough, in that you could have staff work a third or more of their hours, and the government would pay the difference of their full salary. So, okay, that is quite a radical intervention, but unfortunately, although that's what he said, that is not what he meant at all. Within seconds, the government had released a slide. You probably won't see this, but I'll ask Carol to put it up nonetheless. This is part of the Winter Economy Plan. If you want to know more about it, if you Google Winter Economy Plan, you'll get all sorts of details from Treasury. But effectively, it said that any suggestion that the government would be paying 2/3 of people's wages it's completely wrong. And we'll look at in a second how this might impact on employers and how the scheme actually works. And I'll also pose a question about how attractive the scheme is as a result of this. If we could move on to the next slide, thank you. Well, we look at the basics of the scheme. And what are the basics of the scheme? Well, it starts 1st November, no coincidence, the day after furlough comes to an end. It's currently scheduled to run for 6 months, albeit the government say they may change the scheme halfway through. There is some rules about if you're a large company, a large business, whether you'll be eligible or not. But all small and medium enterprises are eligible. There'll be further details released by the government. They did the same with furlough. They kind of had headline announcements, and then sometime thereafter they gave us the details, and we had to scramble about and try and work out what the details were. Where I fear that the job support scheme is going to be the same, so we'll get more details as to what is a SME and what is a large company. I'm sure Carol will have views so where the threshold will be. But for SMEs, we are all eligible to sign up to the job support scheme. Okay, thanks, Carol. We're back on Johnson & Carmichael branding. Here we go. Now, remember I said that Rishi seemed to say that if your employees work for a third or more hours, the government step in and make up the balance, and then they release some details of the scheme which completely contradicted that. This is how it appears that it's going to work. employees would have to work a minimum of their normal hours, up to 33% or more of the normal hours to qualify. They get paid as normal for their normal hours. They would be paid a reduced rate. What happens to the balance? Well, the employer and the government share the balance to a certain extent. They pay a third each. So you have your salary for what you've actually worked, and then you look at the gap between that and your normal pay, and you pay a third each. In terms of normal hours, Lauren finishes asked a relevant question. Lauren, I think in terms of what normal hours are, it's going to be, as you say, exactly the same as the furlough scheme. We'll go back to what people's normal hours were pre-furlough. We're waiting details from the government, but I think it's a pretty safe bet. We look at the pattern of work going back to March, going back to pre-furlough times, or certainly pre the scheme being introduced. If people were working their normal hours through through the summer months, then it will be what was the normal pattern the day before the job support scheme was announced. So 33% paid as normal, or whatever you pay, 50% normal hours worked, 50% normal pay, and the employer and the government share the cost of a third each. But this means that the employee only gets 77% of their normal pay. Any suggestion that the employee would benefit 100%, get the normal salary without working their full time is wrong. And the government contribution is going to be capped, and it's capped at £697.92 per month. So they will not pay more than that per employee. And if you have got your abacus out, you'll quickly see this is beginning to look pretty expensive from an employer's perspective. If you're paying for normal hours and then you're paying for hours not worked over and above that, the scheme suddenly becomes dramatically less attractive. And I'll finish off with a slide, but I'm just going to make one more point in relation to that. In relation to how the scheme will work before then. Sorry, Carol, if you could go on to the penultimate slide, thank you. If we are going to benefit from the scheme, we are going to use the scheme. Remember, these things don't happen automatically. We're back in furlough territory. We have to get agreement, because if employees are working less than their full-time hours and are certainly being paid less than their full-time hours, we can't impose that. In most cases, we'll have to agree to change people's terms and conditions. And so if you're thinking of utilising the job support scheme, and remembering it comes in the 1st of November, remembering furlough comes to an end the 31st October, we should be thinking now whether we're going to utilise the scheme, what sort of hours we would want our employees to work, and what terms we'll be offering them, and then we can draft nice job support scheme contracts for people to sign up if they agree to. But it is a change to terms and conditions. It is not something you can impose. Now, finally, I did say I was getting quite excited about the scheme. It was going to be a replacement to furlough, but it might to a certain extent be the new furlough. It is no such thing. It is no such thing. The feedback, apart from, it was a very snazzy presentation from the Chancellor. I don't want to be critical of the Chancellor, because the furlough scheme was a radical intervention. It was a very snazzy presentation. He even had the CBI and the TUC together on the doors of either Downing Street or 10 Downing Street, 11 Downing Street. I couldn't tell which one, but it's an unusual thing to see the TUC standing next to a Conservative Chancellor. So it was a slick presentation. But the feedback from business bodies and from individual businesses I have spoken to has been negative. And if you have a quick look at this slide, you might see why. So if your employee was working the minimum number of hours to be worked, 33%, that means the hours they're not working 67%. What is the cost to the employer? You're paying 55% of their wages for 33% of the work. Now, at times of economic challenge, that is not particularly attractive, I think, for a lot of employers. And if you had a choice between having two people on the job support scheme and working a combined one equivalent of a full-time hours, then it's going to cost you an awful lot more than having simply one person working full-time hours. Now, in fairness, the more hours an employee works, the less there is a discrepancy between the cost of the employer, what the employer is actually paying for, and the hours actually worked. So if we get to something like 70%, and only 30% hours not worked, then you're paying 80% for 70% of the time. But when you get to that sort of level, the cost savings are not particularly significant. So the initial feedback I'm getting is that the job support scheme is not a replacement to furlough, and I'm not picking up as yet, early days, that most employers are finding this particularly attractive, and I do not think it is going to prevent a very cold wind of redundancies. There's a lot of redundancies already going through. I've been doing this game for 25 years plus. I've never had so many redundancy queries, and I've been about through one or two ups and downs in the economy. I've never known anything like this in terms of clients phoning up. It's all about redundancy just now. And sadly, I don't want to finish on a negative note, but I'm going to. I don't think, from what I'm picking up, the job support scheme is going to make a huge amount of difference to that. But if people have got different views and people have more positive views of the scheme, I'd be very pleased to hear them. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time. If anybody's any questions, I think Carol and I would be very happy to answer them just now.
We've had a couple of questions in the chat box. Kirk, if I could just ask you first of all, because the most recent one is directed at you, and it's from Carl, and he's saying, is it not perhaps fair to say that the employer cost at 33% of hours worked is actually up around 70% once you factor in NI and pension contributions, which paints an even worse picture from an employer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very, very good point. And I didn't point that out, that in furlough, to a certain extent, start of furlough at least, the national insurance and pension contributions were to a certain extent supported. They are not supported, as you say, Carl, they're not supported in the current, in the job support scheme. And you're right, the anomaly between hours worked and hours paid for is actually in reality is worse once you factor in national insurance and pension, precisely as you say. Yeah.
Okay, and another question for you, Kirk, this time from Hazel. She's asking, is there any chance that there will be a clawback of furlough if an employee is made redundant in October?
I can't see that. Having said that, there's a lot of nervousness out there because of the amount of money that was spent on the furlough scheme, and there is people are worried that the government might be very strict in seeking to reclaim furlough payments. And the concern for everybody is that because of furlough scheme, they kept changing the rules. It was very difficult for employers to keep on top of the rules. So if you're looking for a technical breach, there probably are lots of technical breaches out there. And in relation to your point, Hazel, the technical breach they might look at is if people were given longer periods of notice than their contractual entitlement. If they were given longer periods of notice, remained on furlough, so you were making people redundant, but rather than giving them contractual notice, you kept them on until, say, the 31st of October, then technically the government could question that and seek a clawback. But of course, the furlough scheme, I hope they wouldn't do that. And of course, the furlough scheme expressly allows for people to be made redundant during the course of the scheme. So the mere fact you've made somebody redundant or are about to make somebody redundant while furlough is still running is not a breach of the scheme. The scheme actually embraces that. And just one final point in furlough. I hope, and I'm pretty confident I'll be right in this, that the government should not, or the Treasury should not be guilty of nitpicking here. There are some jaw-dropping breaches of the furlough scheme out there. There's, which is borderline fraud, where people have had their staff working away and claiming furlough payments. That's the sort of thing I think the government will be targeting. I do not think they'll be going through everything with a fine-tooth comb looking for technical breaches of the scheme.
Jaw droppings is quite a good description of what my face was like when Carol, you read out one of your first stats, and that was that the average person in the UK, or average adult, has £31,000 of debt. Does that include mortgage debt?
No, that's not mortgage. No.
I've just done my fish face again.
No,
That's horrifying.
it is. It's you're looking at credit cards, unsecured loans, and it is horrifying. And yet I see people in front of me. I mean, I had a couple sit in front of me with $250,000 in credit card debt, and their income, joint income, was under 50,000.
Oh my God, that's horrific.
Yeah, but I think the thing is that it happened so quickly as well, and it very quickly it becomes robbing Peter to pay Paul, and once you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, it's just a spiral, and it's terrifying how quickly people's lives spiral out of control. Jesus, that's even more horrific than the 31,000. That's horrendous. There was a question as well for you, Carol, from Fiona, who's just wanting to double check if your employee financial wellbeing service that Johnson Carmichael offers, is that a free service? Yeah, just to be clear, what we do is we sign up employers, and it's almost like a memorandum of understanding. It's not a contractual arrangement. So, but it gives the employer the security that the service that we offer is professional, independent, and regulated. So there's no cost to the employer. And what we do is we give them, the employer, materials, and it's their choice of how they receive those materials, whether it's digital or physical. And they then put that out to their employees. So it might be within their wage slip, it might be on the one-to-one, you know, if someone comes to an HR person with, as Kurt was saying right at the start, with a debt problem, then they can signpost that employee to us. The employee consultation is also free. And people sort of say to us, well, how do you make money? We are a commercial organisation. So what happens is, if we are simply signposting employees to other third parties, whether, you know, if the situation is such that they just need a little advice and guidance, then that's what we do. And we don't charge for that. So they get the fact find, and then we write out to them with their options. Now, if the options are, you know, if we recommend a formal insolvency route, then that is where, in effect, we will then be generating our fees. Because if it is a debt arrangement scheme or a protected trust deed or a sequestration, then that's how Johnson Carmichael would generate their income. But it wouldn't be, you know, the employee wouldn't be paying upfront fees. They would just be paying fees in the same way as they would if that was a solution for them and they went to, you know, citizens' advice and did exactly the same. So it's not, we will not necessarily be generating fees from 80% of any referrals that we get, but we will generate fees of, you know, from maybe 20% of the referrals that we get in from employers. But when we initially rolled out this service, we also saw the benefit to employers, because initially we only rolled it out to our clients. So we were helping our clients to have a better outcome in terms of their bottom line. So we were trying to just secure and give a benefit to the employer clients that we had. But we now roll it out, you know, to non-clients, simply because of the benefits it has all round. So no, it's entirely free to employers and initially free to employees, and potentially entirely free to employees, depending on what solution they require.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I mean, both of your presentations were, well, let's say I was totally staggered by some of the stats that you shared, Carol, and I actually saw the Johnson Carmichael presentation in Aberdeen about, I'm going to say about 18 months ago, maybe. But that was the first time I met Mervyn, and it might be slightly long, it might be nearer 2 years actually, and the change in the stats between then and now is horrific. Totally.
But even, you know, with COVID as well, I mean, those stats are old news now. I mean, I dread to think, when we update our slides for this presentation, I dread to think what the new numbers are going to be.
Yeah, it is. It's totally staggering, isn't it? And Kirk, I mean, thank you for what you did as well. I'm sure we will take you up on the offer for the redundancy session as well, because I think certainly in Aberdeen, that's the way things are going. With obviously we've got the downturn in oil and gas as well.
Aberdeen has been the perfect storm in Aberdeen now.
But yeah, it's the whole northeast, and with the COVID on top of that. Unfortunately, it doesn't a day go past, unfortunately, when you don't hear of somebody else that's been made redundant. So I'm absolutely positive we will take you up on that, and we'll get back in touch with you about that.
Well,
I'm just double checking to see if there are any more questions. I don't actually think.
Helen may have asked one more question.
Oh, somebody did ask one, sorry, early on. Let me just, because I've got that in my email, 2 secs. And it was, this is where at my age I have to go between my glasses and not my glasses. It was from Sonia, I think. She's saying, could you give any advice to a third sector organisation which is keen to provide assistance to its workforce through financial well-being, but which is in the climate has little or no budget to help with this? We've already signposted to many of the great resources available. Any top tips as to anything that could be done? Thank you. So I hope, I don't actually, I have a quick look to see.
Our service is free to employers. Yeah. That would stand for the charity as well. So absolutely, if she wants to get in touch with me directly, and I can certainly talk her through it. And we do have a Sonia with us, so I presume that is the same Sonia.
Just thank you.
Which is great. And we've got one new message. Oh yeah, no, it says to say thank you. Yeah, cool, great. Well, if there's no other questions, I mean, this has been enlightening and shocking in equal measures. So thank you both very much. Really appreciate you giving up your time again to present for us. It's been lovely to meet you, Carol. It's been great to see you again, Kirk. And again, on behalf of the branch, thank you so much for supporting us. We really do appreciate that. And I'm sure that the information that you have shared today will be useful to everybody who was on the presentation. So thank you both very much.
Okay, and it's really good seeing everybody. Thanks for everybody attending. Okay.
Yeah, likewise.
Great stuff.
Nice to meet some of you.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Thanks ever so much.